Hey everybody, welcome. Today I'm going to be chatting with you about some common resume formatting challenges that I see and how to address them. So I've got a great little example from a wonderful Whippy member who we obviously changed her name and important identifying details. We've got her permission to share a changed version of her resume here, but we've nicknamed her Rebecca McAwesome. So now we're going to look at Rebecca McAwesome's amazing resume and see how we can change just based on formatting alone the way that her resume gets read and received by recruiters. This is Rebecca's resume as it sits now. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can read it. But right now, if I'm a recruiter, let's take a look at this resume sort of holistically and see how I'd read it, right? So I can see up the top, I've got her name, and then I've got sort of like an objective statement, like sort of like who she is, what she brings to the table. I guess it's more of a summary than an objective statement. I can see down the left, she's got a bunch of different skills. Then I've got work history in the right hand side column, with a bunch of usual bullet points with all the different jobs she's had. And also, by the way, on the left hand side over here, underneath their skills, she's got her education. And then down at the very bottom, she's got her email, her LinkedIn, and her phone number. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how I would review this if I were a recruiter. So, as a recruiter or a hiring manager, someone who's reviewing this resume and is between you and the amazing job that you want, I am looking at this as quickly as I can. I will have, a stack of these this high on my desk, or a virtual stack of these this high in my inbox is really more what it's like these days. And when I set aside like an hour to go through a bazillion resumes, like it's not a fun process for me, honestly, because most of the resumes are not the people I'm looking for. The vast majority of them are usually not good fits for the role, especially if I'm just looking at raw applications coming in from LinkedIn or Indeed or a job board or a company job site or something like that. But that's even still true if I've got a recruiting team that I'm working with. Like, let's imagine I'm a hiring manager and I've got internal recruiters of the company or even an external recruiter that we've hired. They'll do some amount of filtering. So it's not people applying to a mining engineering job and they've only ever worked as a server and they don't have a degree. Like, those people are lovely, but they won't be able to likely do this job without first getting some education. I won't be weeding through those kinds of things if I'm not looking at just direct applications. But quite often, part of the reason we have hiring managers involved in reviewing these things is because they bring an amount of technical expertise to the table. I can tell by looking at a resume much faster and much better with a great degree of accuracy whether somebody's a fit than any HR person's going to usually be able to do, even if they're quite experienced. So no matter how I slice it, I've kind of got this slog ahead of me where I've got a bunch of people who aren't really gonna give me what I want, and I've got to get through it so that I can stop doing the hell that I'm in now, which is having too much work and not enough people, and get to the amazing paradise that I'm trying to get to, which is finally having a great new employee who takes a bunch of work off me and my team's plate and becomes a wonderful person we love to work with. So when I come into this, first of all, I'm already exhausted. And if I'm reading the first resume in the pile, I might have a little bit of attention. But by the time I'm on like the fifth one, I'm like, I'm done reading these. It's a lot of reading, right? So people have really, really short attention spans and they tend to scan. So the most valuable real estate on your resume is sort of the top, where's my mouse here? The top corner of the screen, right? Like, up here is where you sort of read with the most vim and vigor. By the time you get down here, I mean, you might be scanning up here, but down here, you're really scanning. There's something in UX called the F-shaped reading pattern. So this has been around for a really long time, and it describes how people read content on the internet. So you probably know if you pick up an article to read in your daily morning scroll, when you read it, you might actually get into the weeds and read the whole thing. But especially initially, you're often reading in kind of an F shape. You'll read a lot in the first line or two, first paragraph or two, and then you kind of start scanning down the page. Something might catch your eye. You might read it again, and then you might keep on reading down, 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 down until you see something good. So your eyes, as you're reading, the parts of the page that you read actually make that F-shaped pattern a lot at the top, a lot of scanning all the way down, maybe a few points of interest to form that kind of cross that a capital F makes, right? So within your own resume, you're going to have sort of a lot of reading up in here, a lot of scanning down the left-hand side over here. So, what that means for us in terms of formatting this resume is that we want to put the most important information, the kind of eye catching information, and the kind of information that people are that recruiters and hiring managers are really looking for to confirm if somebody is a yes or a no, right up at the top, because that's the valuable real estate, right? And every manager or recruiter kind of reviews resumes differently, but the way that I do it, and I think a common way is sort of, when I look at this, I'm initially sort of scanning for like, 3 to 5 things. Like if I've got a job description, it's like, if I'm hiring for a mining engineer role in mid-range planning, let's say, I probably want somebody who's had short-range planning experience, who's worked on a mine site, obviously who has a degree, but almost everybody who applies with some experience will have that. So I'm not that concerned. um and I want somebody who's maybe been working for a certain amount of time, right? And maybe on top of that, I want somebody who's got experience working a lot with operations, like not somebody who locks himself away in a desk and makes mind plans, but somebody who actually is out there talking to ops, right? So let's imagine those are the 5 things that I was looking for in a mining engineering resume. I'm just scanning, I'm looking for keywords that tell me whether I've got those 4 things, and I literally will keep a little check mark like on post-its, and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then at the end, I'll kind of give them a score like, okay, they got 5, they got 4, they got 3. Anybody who's getting a 2, I'm probably not giving them a call, right? And so everyone's got their different way, but there's sort of an assessment process that goes on. It's like, do they have the basics initially, right? So those basics that we think they're going to be looking for, those are you in or are you out type things, really need to be in the top part of it because that's what people are searching for initially. So with that information, let's take a look at Rebecca's resume. So right off the hop, I can tell you that the interesting parts of this resume to me, the most interesting parts are skills that she brings to the table. This is a lot of what I'd be looking for. Rebecca McAwesome is, or Rebecca McAwesome Sauce rather. She's in sales, so these are a whole bunch of sales competencies, for hiring and sales. These are some of the things I'd be looking for in my knock it off list. And then the work history, especially her most recent job, which she's had for several years now, so it's not a 6 month experience or something like that. This is where I'm going to be concentrating most of my attention. Now, like I mentioned with kind of when I'm looking at mining engineering resumes, like education is not really that relevant, right? Education is not something that probably warrants being super high up on the resume. And, notice that this education thing is both relatively high up on the page and taking up that valuable left hand side real estate here, right? So, one of the first changes that I advocate for making to Rebecca's uh, resume here is to move this education way down to the bottom. Just quite often, like, if you don't have it, you're disqualified, but we don't view it as a plus sort of thing. So it's got to be on there, but it doesn't have to be first in show. So typically, I put education down at the bottom. The only exception to that is if you are fresh out of school, then your education is highly relevant because they want to know, are you a student or have you graduated yet, right? So put your education at the top. But generally speaking, unless you're applying for academic roles where education is really, really important, or you're applying, fresh out of school where that education is temporally relevant to what you've been up to and your qualification, I would stick it down near the bottom across the board. Few exceptions, but generally speaking. Then, when I sort of look at this, I want to pay attention to how scannable it is. So, if you just really step back from it and you look at it on that first page there, by the way, when this hits my desk, I won't be viewing it probably two up like this. I'll be viewing it more like this, right? So when I hit that first page there, what I notice is this is like, it's a very wall of text. It's pretty impenetrable. When I start reading this, in through the work history, I go, okay, surgical sales territory manager, medical medicine co, SaaS, okay, whatever. Led a team of technology specialists and manage a okay, next line. Coach team members on best practices for qualifying leads, generating high quality. Okay, next. Leverage B2B selling strategies to refine product offerings. Okay, I've already tuned out. Increase market share by acquiring new B2B institutional accounts and successfully onboard. Okay, I don't care. Drove sales to achieve an 8.4 CAGR over 4 years, including 2 years within COVID pandemic. Okay, that's finally interesting. So notice how I read, right? Notice how it's like I don't read all the way to the end of the lines. I'm short attention, trying to find things that I think are interesting and of value, right? And the way that this is set up, given that it's such a block and it's so dense, actually makes it a little bit harder for me to do that. And so I want to have a slightly different layout here that helps with some of those things. I want to have a little more white space. I want to have more variety in the length of these lines as well, so that this all becomes more easily scannable. So that reading it is a bit more of a joy and it actually pulls me in as opposed to right now. I have a kind of a visceral, like, oh my God, I can't wait to get away from this resume, right? Which is really common. Resumes, like, to be clear, are very hard to make interesting and fun. They're a little bit dry, right? Like, you're not going to be like putting fun dinosaur gifs and little unicorns in the corner of your resume. It's still a professional doc, right? It's only going to be so exciting. But as it sits, this is very. You remember those old, Microsoft versus Apple ads back in the day that Apple made so much hay making fun of Microsoft as being kind of old and out of touch. Well, this is a Microsoft resume and not a cool Apple resume. I don't see any white headphones. I don't hear any great tunes. This is not an iPod ad. This is a 1995 format. Okay, so how do we do that? Here I am dragging poor Rebecca up big awesome sauce. Don't worry, she's got a great resume. I've worked with her. Looks good. Okay, so I want to do some reformatting. And one more thing I want to chat about just before I get into how I reformat that is coming back up to this very, very first part of her resume. So, like I said, she's got this sort of summary up top. Now, summaries, when you first think about them, they seem like a good idea. Ooh, can I highlight this? They seem like a, I'm going to give up on highlighting it. They seem like a really good idea because you're like, okay, it's taking all of my experience and boiling it down to just the most important things. It's like a highlight reel. Why wouldn't a recruiter want that? Holly's saying that they want the best information up front, right in the F where they'll read it, right? Great. But in practice, the way these usually sort of work out is they are quite often anodyne statements about your skills that don't really have anything to back them up, right? So if I look here, I've got ambitious sales professional. Yeah, you and every other sales professional who's applied with over 8 years of experience. That's actually a valuable piece of information to me. Prospecting, qualifying, pursuing sales opportunities. Okay, but also every salesperson on the planet does those things. You're just describing sales. Proven ability to create and execute healthy pipelines that achieve year-over-year growth. I like that statement. I like it, but it's at the end of this little thing, right? And with the way that the formatting is, this is kind of jammed right up against her name, and so I don't tend to read it. So these things very rarely actually achieve the kind of zazz that I want them to. They don't usually pull attention the way I want. So I'll show you a couple things that I'm going to do here now for the formatting. And one of the first things I'm going to do, spoiler alert, is actually get rid of that kind of objective or summary statement overall. Now, I do keep them from time to time, but this is a case where I would tend to get rid of them. All right, so let's look at the reformatted version of Rebecca McAwesome Sauce's resume. All right, now listen, is this the world's most beautiful resume? No, this is a pretty basic resume format. But I want you to notice when I pull this up immediately how much easier this feels to read, right? So I'll pull the other one back again. Notice it's like, oof, oppressive. So many words. Like I have no interest in diving into the left-hand side of this doc, right? Whereas this one, ooh, there's some air. It's fresh. There's space between things. It's easily scannable, right? This is still a bit dense when we get down into here. We'll talk about how to make these bullet points more readable. I've got a whole other video about that. But I want you to notice how a couple of the key things that we did. We put, a little more space between the name and the content of the resume. I put all the contact information up at the top. It's okay to have it on the bottom. It's really common to have it up at the top, which is sort of why I put it there. I always want them to know how to get in contact. I never want them to have to think about that. So I tend to put it at the top of a resume. And I especially, she did this, but for any of you who don't, I've included a LinkedIn profile and I've cut out all the extraneous HTTPS, www, whatever. Make it a clickable link, make it as short as possible, and make it pretty, right? This one says we've made up a link. You actually have the ability to go into LinkedIn and customize what the link is. So it's not like Rebecca McAwesome 86724538B. It can instead say Rebecca McAwesome or Rebecca McAwesome sales, right? Or something like that. So give yourself a pretty little LinkedIn link and keep it as short as you can. So a couple things there. Then you'll notice that I've taken the skills section from where they were over on the left-hand side, and I've moved them right up front. Part of the reason I've done that, I love skills sections. I think they're great. You can have in here, like these are just sort of hard technical skills, but you can also have, if you're a software developer, the languages that you know or the frameworks that you work in. This is a great place to put in buzzwords, right? Here I am today in 2024 being like, if you have anything to do with AI, dump that on a resume. That's probably going to help you raise somebody's eyebrows, maybe get an interview, right? So it's a good place to sort of put in some of the keywords that they're looking for. And, for me, if I was going, listen, my list for hiring somebody with, for this role that I've got is I need them to have done B2B. I would love it if they've already worked in Salesforce since that's what we've done. I want them to be able to, go out and prospect for new business, not just deal with business that we've got. Like I need somebody who's scrappy, who can do both. And I want them to have managed a relatively big budget, right? When I look at this list already in the skills section. I can see I've got those pieces. I've got prospecting, I've got B2B sales, I've got the Salesforce piece. A bunch of my questions get answered right off the hop. So I really like those up here. I tend to be a big booster for them. There's other approaches. If you're not a fan, you don't have to, but I like them. And I'll often put these skills with headers. So you kind of break them up. Again, that F-shaped reading pattern, whenever you see there's other different patterns that exist on the internet, but one of them is that headers tend to refresh people's interest in reading, right? And so when you've got skills or when you've got sales, leadership, business and analytics, software, those things renew people's interest, and then you get a fresh chance at an F-shaped reading pattern after. So after business analytics, I go, okay, ooh, what is it? Business analytics, sales analytics, Excel. Okay, so I start doing that F-shaped pattern again. Whereas if it was in one long list without these headings, I probably would never have read these because they're so far down the list. So headings can really be helpful. And sometimes people will go, I don't want to use that much vertical real estate. Like I'm trying to fit my resume on one page or 2 pages. For those of you who don't know, resumes should be not be longer than 2 pages, really, unless you're producing maybe an academic CV with a bunch of papers or something. That's different. But general corporate resume, 2 pages is what you're aiming for. And they go, it's taken up too much vertical space. So columns are a really good way to help with that, right? Here we've split it into two. We might even be able to actually split this into 3 columns. We might have enough space. And you'll notice that under skills, these are really short, 1 or 2 words, 3 words, absolutely max, right? These are not meant to be sentences. This is a highly scannable list meant for the people that are like me, who are just like, do you have the 5 skills I want? Do you have the 4 skills I'm looking for? Okay, so that's the first little bit. Then after that, I get straight into work history. As I mentioned, education's way down at the bottom. Um, in work history, the main thing that I want from you in formatting is, make sure you've got an easy differentiation between the company that you worked for and the title that you had. So here we're using some different font treatments to separate these out: bold versus italics. That's fine. It doesn't really matter which way you do it, as long as it's clear what's what and you maintain that pattern throughout. And then I want to be able to see what dates that you worked there, right? So month and year is good enough. When it comes to education, don't include the date that you started. It's almost never relevant. Always just include your graduating year. Um, you probably don't need the month unless, like, if you're a student who graduated off schedule, like instead of in May, you graduated in December. You might put December if if you've been working since December and it's been 6 months. You might put that in or something. But I actually might argue not to. But anyways, that's the only time I'd ever put months on education. Otherwise, just the end date. But for everything else, you want the month and year of your start and end date so folks can kind of track it. And then I want to get straight into the types of responsibility. One thing that you'll notice, this wasn't on Rebecca's original document, but is here, is also missing on this one, and that's good, is she hasn't put the locations that she's worked. Sometimes folks will say, like, Medical Medicine Co., comma, Vancouver, BC, super amazing university, comma, Saskatoon. And I think she actually, now that I say that, I think she actually did have that in with these pieces. But I tend not to put locations because they are just sort of extraneous information. We talked about that short attention span, right? Very rarely is somebody going to hire you because they're like, oh my God, she worked in Saskatoon. Like, it's just not mostly relevant. And so we're adding in information, we're cluttering up the page, we're making the overall thing feel more oppressive, harder to read, more dense, and we're not actually giving them information that they want. So a big part of the work in building a resume is kind of like, the reason why we use spotlights on stage at plays or dance recitals or things like that is to direct the audience's attention to the thing we want them to look at. We're always doing the same thing too in any written document or speech or hell, YouTube video even, right? We use certain tools to sort of emphasize the key pieces. And the reason why we put a spotlight on the thing we want somebody to see on stage and we put darkness everywhere else is because we don't want people to see everything. We're not trying to clutter up their thinking and their mind and their vision with extraneous detail. So for me, location is almost always extraneous detail. Turn the lights out on that part of the stage, aka take it off your resume. I don't think you need it, and I think it just makes it harder to read. There's a few exceptions to that. So if you are, for example, I come from the mining industry, right? Quite often in the mining industry, where you've worked is actually kind of relevant to what you've done. There's a big difference between, mining in northern Canada in freezing temperatures, where you have a giant spring thaw that means that all your roads go to hell and nothing can get done, versus mining in Australia, where heat is a huge concern and sun is a huge concern, and the types of mineralization tend to be totally different, right? So there will be times where the physical location does kind of make a difference to people, and they want to know, have you worked in a specific country, maybe, right? If you're somebody who's working internationally or at a senior enough level where that international work experience really matters, then yes, location can be important then. But if you're just somebody who's like, worked mostly within a 3-hour drive of where you live, or you moved across the country once and you're still in the same country, and it's like, is Newfoundland that different than Vancouver? It's a little different, but not really. I don't think it warrants the space on the resume. Um, and one other piece I'd say is if you've worked in a location that is like particularly renowned within your industry, so like the tech industry in Silicon Valley. Look, if I've worked in Silicon Valley, I'm going to find a way to sneak that onto a resume because it's viewed as a bit of a feather in the cap sometimes. But generally speaking, other than the things I've mentioned, no need for location. Okay, so I've given you kind of the Cole's notes about formatting a resume. Oh, actually, I've just remembered one more thing. You'll notice that I don't have on this resume a couple of sections that we see quite often. So one section I don't have on here is sort of like courses in continuing education or certifications. Sometimes those can be helpful to include, but only if they're specifically job relevant. So if you're somebody who is a professional engineer or geologist, you're going to want to include that typically above or underneath your education section. Say what your licensing is and when you obtained it, and that it's still valid, and who's licensed you. All those things should be included in your resume. And if you've taken courses that are particularly helpful, like, let's imagine Rebecca McAwesome had done a very famous sales training. I'd have her put that on her resume, maybe not under the education session, but in a continuing ed section, and just sort of list the name of the course and then the year that she completed it. So those things can be helpful, but what we don't want to do is list like every course that you've taken as part of your degree, or again, if you're been a couple of years out of school or even 6 months out of school, definitely don't put projects that you got or your GPA or anything like that. Again, that's all extraneous detail and it tends to make you seem more junior. You want to have that sense of scale. Is this useful information to somebody who would be hiring somebody at my level? If not, is it something you'd put a spotlight on? If not, don't include it. So that's one section that we didn't really talk about. And another section that you'll notice is not on this resume, but it is on many resumes, is sections about like volunteering or hobbies. If you've got the space in there, you can throw some of those on. I wouldn't make it a big part of your resume. I think most of the space in your resume is going to be better dedicated to showing off some of your professional competencies. But I think it can be helpful to throw on there as a bit of a conversation starter, as a moment of connection potentially with a recruiter. So feel free to put those in, but if you put them in, make sure they're way down at the bottom because those are color, but not the most important thing on your resume. All right, so Rebecca McAwesome, you've got a newly formatted resume. Now, as I mentioned, there's a way to jazz this up and make this look beautiful. Again, this is a pretty basic format, but still something that's much more readable than what we had been dealing with before. All right, hope you found this helpful. And if you ever want help with your own resume, know that I can help you, and you can find information all about that on Wimpy.com. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.